How you guys feeling this morning? You doing good? Doing all right? Hey, anybody raise your hand if you are a fan of Halloween. Any Halloween fans out there? Yes. My hand is up. I love Halloween. This is one of the best holidays, in my opinion. I think it's like right below Christmas for me. Maybe even like equal to Christmas sometimes. I know. Hey, but think about it. What other holiday you get to dress up in weird things and then get free candy from people? It's awesome. It's awesome, right? I've always loved Halloween. I love scary stuff like haunted houses and scary movies, all that stuff. And so even when I was a little kid, I loved Halloween. In fact, I want to take you on a little trip down memory lane. Some of my favorite Halloween costumes when I was a little kid. And so this first one's coming up on the screen. This is me, I don't know, like age like 7 maybe. I'm the white ninja is what I am right there. So that was a pretty good one. But this next one, my mom went through this phase where she liked to make my Halloween costumes. Any other moms make your Halloween costumes? If you can't tell what I am, I'm supposed to be a 3-headed monster. Okay, so those are heads. She cut eyes out of a picture, I think, which makes it even weirder and creepier on there. This last one is a little bit tough for me. This is a tough one. I think I was going for like a Native American warrior. I ended up looking a lot like Pocahontas, I think. Which is fine. Pocahontas is a great movie, you know? It was one of my favorites when I was a kid. So I love Halloween, but if you think about it, Halloween is a strange holiday, really. Okay, think about this for a second. Millions of little kids and not so little kids. They travel around in groups to neighborhoods, knocking on strangers' doors and asking them for free candy. It's weird, right? And then the weird thing is the strangers say, oh, cute, how cute, it's a little Deadpool. And he gives them free candy, right? Give them candy. That's a weird thing. Think about it. Except for that one house that gives you like a granola bar and a toothbrush. You know that house, you avoid it. You skip it, right? You skip it. Halloween is a weird holiday. Try doing that on like a normal day of the week and see how people respond. Just knock on their door and say, trick or treat, give me some candy. Last night, a kid said that he did that like a couple weeks ago with his friends, and they were like, I don't have any candy, but here's a watermelon. And they gave him a watermelon. So maybe try it. You might get some cool produce if you do that. Please record yourself doing that and send me the video. I will bail you out of jail, I promise. But Halloween is a strange holiday, but since I love Halloween, I love scary stuff, spooky things, I love it all. I've loved this series that we're in, Strange But True. We're talking about some of the strangest stories in the Bible. They're not necessarily scary, most of them, but they're definitely super weird and strange, and they're true, which makes them even weirder, I think. So a couple weeks ago, we talked about a guy named Jonah who got swallowed by this giant fish and lived inside of the fish for 3 days until it spat him back out. That's strange, right? And the last week, we talked about this guy, Daniel, who got thrown into this pit full of hungry lions, but somehow survived because God saved him. Weird, strange stories. Today, the strange story that we're going to talk about just happens to be my favorite story in the entire Bible. I mean, besides Jesus. So Jesus and then this story. It's story of this guy named Gideon. And some of you guys maybe have heard of Gideon before. Probably a lot of you haven't heard the story of Gideon before. But it's one of my favorites. And so who is this guy, Gideon? Let me give you just a little background just for a quick second. So Gideon was an Israelite, one of God's chosen people, and he lived during this time in their history where the Israelites, they were disobeying God, they started worshiping other false gods, and so God got really sick and tired of it, and he let this other nation called Midian kind of take over Israel. And these Midianites that they were called, they were not nice people. So they oppressed Israel, they took them as slaves, they stole all their livestock, they destroyed all their crops, they basically left the Israelites hopeless, penniless, and starving. And they got so desperate, the Israelites did, that they finally cried out to God for help. This God that they've been ignoring for a long time, they cried out to him for help. And so he sends this guy, Gideon. Now here's Gideon enters the story. The first time we find this guy, Gideon, he's literally hiding in a pit from the Midianites because he's scared of them. So he's hiding in this pit from them, and then all of a sudden, something really unexpected and strange happens. This angel appears in front of Gideon. But bam, there's an angel in front of him. And this angel turns to Gideon, and he says this weird thing to him. It's coming up on the screen in verse 12. He says, mighty hero, the Lord is with you. This is what he says to Gideon. Gideon's like, you talking to me? You talking to me? And the angel goes on, and he says this, verse 14, I think, is coming up. Then the Lord turned to him, and he said, oh, this angel, by the way, is kind of acting as like God's representative. So it's like God is appearing in this angel's form to Gideon. And he says, go with the strength that you have, Gideon, and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. Now, Gideon's response is not so much like oh, me? Sweet, let's do it. I'm in. It's more like excuse me? Here's what he says. Look at Gideon's response. Next verse. He says, but Lord, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, which is part of Israel, and I am the least in my entire family. In other words, Gideon's like, I think you got the wrong Gideon. You might want to look. I think there's another Gideon in a pit like 3 pits down. You might want to go check with him. He's probably more your guy. I'm not a mighty hero. If you see me right now, I'm hiding. I'm literally hiding. Gideon's like, I'm not your guy. But the angel of the Lord says, no, you are my guy. You are the Gideon that I'm going to send to rescue Israel. Now let's pause here for just a second in Gideon's story, because this story is a really strange one. As we talk about it, there's actually some really powerful truths that this strange story can teach us about God and how he sees us. And the first truth that you might want to write down on your outline, and the first blank, is this. It's coming up on the screen. This strange story teaches us the truth that Jesus sees what could be, not just what is. Write that down. Jesus sees what could be, not just what is. Let me explain this. When Jesus looked at Gideon, because remember, this angel was kind of representing God. So when he looked at Gideon, he didn't just see this scared, scrawny, weak little man hiding in a pit. That's not what he saw. When Jesus looked at Gideon, he saw a mighty hero that he was going to use to save his people. Now, Gideon certainly did not see himself as a mighty hero. You saw that in his response. He didn't see himself like that at all, because he only saw what was right there in that moment. He saw what he was as this weak, scared man hiding in a pit. But that's not how Jesus saw him. You see, as human beings, we can't see the future. Wouldn't it be awesome if you could see the future? Wouldn't that be great? Yeah, we would save us from a lot of harm and trouble. It would save us from tripping over that thing, because we saw ourselves tripping over that thing, and now we know how to step over it and not trip on it. We'd probably win the lottery all the time. It'd be awesome, right? If we could see the future, it'd be great, But we can't. We don't have that ability as humans. All that we can see is right now, what's right in front of us in that moment. But here's the truth that I wish that all people believed, and especially junior hires. Because I think sometimes as a junior hire, you can get kind of tunnel vision, right? We can get tunnel vision and only see what's right now in this moment, and sometimes it's not awesome. But here's the truth that I wish that all people believed. This isn't a blank, but you might want to write this on the side, because it's a truth. That where I am now is not where I will be forever. You might write that on the side. Where I am now is not where I will be forever. Because some of you, when you look at your life right now, you look at yourself, things aren't awesome. Maybe things even feel a little hopeless, like Gideon. Maybe it feels like you're stuck in this place and it's never going to change. Maybe your family is kind of a mess right now. Maybe your friendships are really hard. Maybe when you look at yourself, you don't like what you see. Maybe you just feel sad a lot. Maybe you didn't make that team, or you didn't get elected for ASB. Maybe you feel like you don't fit in. Maybe when you look at yourself, you don't love what you see. But here's the truth, that where you are right now is not where you will be forever. It's not. You are a work in progress. I am a work in progress. Thank the Lord, right? We have not arrived anywhere yet, and that's okay. We're not meant to arrive yet. There's a lot left to your story that's still being written. And that's true of Gideon, right? That's true of his story as well. That where he was right then in that moment, even though he didn't see himself as a mighty warrior, did not change the fact that God saw him as a mighty warrior. When God looks at you, he doesn't just see where you are right now. He sees what could be. Okay, let's go back to Gideon's story. So God comes to him and he says, Gideon, you're a mighty warrior. You're going to save my people, all right? Gideon's like, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if I'm your guy. And so he asked God to give him some signs, some weird stuff with a fleece. You can read it on your own. It's a weird part of the story. But God says over and over, he confirms, no, you're my guy and you're going to do this. So eventually Gideon's like, okay, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I trust you, kind of. I kind of trust you a little bit. And so he starts building his army. He goes throughout Israel, starts gathering some some troops. And he actually does a pretty good job. He gets an army of about 32,000 people, which sounds like a lot, right? However, the Midianite army was 120,000 people. So if you're good at math, they're outnumbered like 4-1. And so Gideon's like, I got this army. It's not as big as the Midianites, but maybe we've got God on our side. He says that we're going to win, so maybe we'll be able to pull it out, even with just 32,000. But then the story takes another weird turn because God comes to Gideon. He's like, no, actually, Gideon, your army's too big. Gideon's like, excuse me? It's too big? He says, yeah, it's too big because if you win this battle, you guys are going to think that you won the battle and not me, and that's not okay. So you need to send 2/3 of your men home. So Gideon's like, okay. So he sends 2/3 of the men home. He's left with about 10,000 men. Then God says, actually, it's still too big. Gideon's like, what? What? It's too big? And he's like, yes, it's too big. So God dwindles it down again, and Gideon's left with just 300 men. 300 up against an army of 120,000. I don't even know what the odds are anymore because that's a lot of math. I'm not good at math. But that's a lot, right? I think it's like 400-1. Somebody told me. 400-1. That's what Gideon's army is up against. And somehow he has just enough faith to say, God, I don't know how this is going to happen. I don't know how we're going to win this battle with just 300, but I trust you just enough, I think, to go for it. And so Gideon takes his 300 men, and they go to where the Midianite army is camped. They're camped in this little valley, and 120,000 men. And they go at night, and Gideon has this guy spread out around, circling the camp. But before he sends them out, he gives them 2 things to go into this battle with. 2 things. Not a sword, not like a spear, not a bow and arrow, not even like a sling with rocks in it. All that he sends his guys into battle with is a horn to blow in and a torch that's in a clay pot, which is a weird thing. I don't really know how that works, but it's in the story. A horn and a torch in a clay pot. Not exactly battle-ready weapons, in my opinion, but he sends his guys, and they go and they circle the camp. And at the same time, on Gideon's command, they all blow their horns. They shout for the Lord and for Gideon, and then something really weird happens. All the Midianites, they start fighting each other in confusion. God makes them all confused. He sends confusion into their camp, and they all start killing each other. And pretty soon, they're almost all dead except for a few that flee, and then Gideon's army chases after them until they're all defeated. Gideon and his 300 guys beat an army of 120,000 men. Isn't that crazy? This is a weird story, but like epic, right? This is an awesome and weird and strange, but epic story. It's kind of like the greatest underdog story of all time, but actually it's not really an underdog story at all when you think about it. And like I said, there's a couple really powerful truths we can pull out of this. We already talked about one. Here's the next one I want you to write down. The next truth that this story can show us is this, that Jesus can do anything with anyone at any time. Write that down. Jesus can do anything with anyone at any time. Gideon is proof of this, right? He is the least likely, the least qualified, the weakest, and yet God uses him to do something really big that changes the course of history because he has just enough faith to say yes. God loves to use the most unlikely people to do his work and his things because he loves to show his power through us and our weaknesses. It's kind of one of the coolest things that God does because really when you think about it, Gideon's ability to do this had nothing to do with him at all, right? He was weak. He was the least. And yet God used him. It was all about God's strength, God's ability, and Gideon's ability just to trust him enough to say yes. And that's true in our lives. It's not just true for Gideon in this story. It's not just like, oh, that was cool that happened, that God was able to use that one guy that one time to do that one cool thing. No, that's true for any of us and all of us, that God has some things that he can and wants to do through each one of us. It has nothing to do with us, our abilities or lack thereof. It has everything to do with God's strength and our ability to say yes to him. And that leads us to the last truth I want you to write down, which is this. Even small faith can be used in big ways. Write that down. Even small faith can be used in big ways. Gideon actually didn't have a giant faith, did he? When you think about it, he doubted a lot. He questioned God. He asked him for signs. He tested him. He didn't have a huge amount of faith, especially at the beginning of his story. But even the little amount of faith that he did have, God was able to use in a really big way. Jesus, later on in the Bible, he tells his disciples, he says, even faith the size of a tiny little mustard seed is enough faith to tell a mountain to go throw itself into the sea. Even a tiny amount of faith like that is enough for me to use. And Gideon is living proof of that fact, isn't he? He's living proof of that. Later on in the New Testament of the Bible, there's a book called Hebrews. And in the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, it's a really cool chapter. Sometimes it's called the Hall of Faith. Because the author of Hebrews, he kind of goes throughout the entire Bible. And he lists all these different men and women whose faith was used by God to do something really cool and awesome. Gideon is mentioned in the Hall of Faith. And I love how the author of Hebrews, how he defines what faith is in verse 1 of chapter 11. It's coming up on the screen. This is what he says faith is. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. You see, the truth is, guys, that having faith means that we don't see how it's going to happen. We don't see the other side. We don't see how it'll work out. We don't see how the battle will be won. But we have just enough faith to trust God and trust his abilities. That's what Gideon did. He didn't know how this battle was going to get won. He's like, I got 300 guys. I'm outnumbered 400 to 1. And yet, I have enough faith to say, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I trust you. As you've been listening to this story, here's the prayer that I've been praying this weekend for all of us, is that as we hear this story about Gideon, maybe that there's something in your life that you can think of right now. Maybe you've already been thinking about it as you've been listening to this. Maybe there's something in your life that feels a little bit impossible. Maybe there's a situation that feels like, I don't know how this will ever change. I don't know how it'll get better. I don't know how it'll be any different. I don't know how my family situation is going to improve. I don't know how that illness of that person that I love or the illness that I am experiencing is ever going to get healed or be better. I don't know how my friendships are going to improve, right? I don't know how what I'm going through right now is ever going to change. It feels impossible. Maybe you have something that's coming in your mind. And maybe Jesus is just asking for you to trust him just enough to say, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I'm going to choose to trust you like Gideon did. I don't know how the battle's going to get won, but I'm choosing to trust you. Maybe there's something like that for you. I don't know if you have a relationship with Jesus or not. I don't know if you've been following him, you consider yourself a Christ follower or not, but regardless, for every one of us, we are a work in progress. We have not arrived, and that's okay. Where you are now is not where you will be forever. When Jesus looks at you, he doesn't just see what's wrong about you right now, what's broken, what's messed up, what feels impossible. He sees what could be. And having faith means that we trust him and say, I don't know what the other side is going to be, but I'm going to choose to say yes, that I trust you in your power and your strength. So I'm going to pray for us. Your thought for the week before I pray is faith makes the impossible possible. Write that down. Faith makes the impossible possible. But I'm going to pray to wrap us up. And as I pray, if there's something in your life that feels impossible, I want you to think about that in your mind. And as I pray, you just say, Jesus, I'm going to trust you with this thing that feels impossible because I know that you can make impossible things possible. Just say that prayer yourself in your mind. Let's bow our heads, close our eyes. Let me pray. Jesus, I thank you for being the kind of God that doesn't just abandon us and leave us, especially when things feel hard. And I pray that for every one of us, whatever's happening in our lives right now that feels impossible, whether that's with our family or our friends or health or situation or just the way that we feel or think about ourselves, I pray for all the things that feel impossible, that you would give us just enough faith, like Gideon had, to trust you, even though we don't see how it's going to change, we don't see what the other side is going to be. Give us just enough faith. Help us to remember that where I am now, even if it's not awesome, is not where I will be forever. That there is more to my story that's still being written. And that you can do anything with any of us, anytime that you want. You remind us of those things. We pray this in your name, Jesus.